I just looked at when you're going to die, and then you said, I don't know. I said, Alex, that happened that much further. You will not have made it. You'll never do this again. And then all of a sudden he's like freaking out. And he's sitting in the bathroom just freaking out, and I come over, what's going on? I said, hey, you're fine. I said, there's a couple of pieces of blood on here. I said, if it was bad, you'd be sitting in the puddle. You're not sitting in the puddle, you're fine.
All right, good evening, everybody. Grab a coffee that has been made. The kettle has been boiled. The cookies, candy, leftover Halloween candy has all been prepared.
What is this worse than the dentist? No, the dentist was worse. It hurts, but it's not that bad. And they were already stitching the back next to
And you had the best stitcher around.
Well, that's what you said, but yet when he did it, it was just kind of like,
You know why? Because he's done it.
Going there, and then he was back over here. It's like just.
He's done it so many. Because he said he's done it so many times that it's just second nature. Like he's done so many.
I know, but the way he came
drama.
across, it was
Yeah.
just like he didn't really. He was like, it just seemed unsure. It was very sure.
This was given
Oh, yes, Minister. Oh,
they wanted to do 3 bars.
yes,
But that's it.
to ministerial. Okay.
Give that to you.
Okay, I will fill that up. Nope, you can do that. All right, everybody, grab a spot, and we need to get started. It is already 7:30, and if you're online, we respect your time as well, wherever you are and whatever you are doing. So, Joyce, would you be so kind as to hand these out? If you are online, hopefully you have been able to grab the PDF that I posted on Facebook yesterday, I believe, and you should have this available for you as well, so that you can follow along with the same notes that everyone has here.
Are these new, Dan?
Yes, these are all new. So these are all new. Just the front page is the same because it's our marker anchor page to keep us on track. So these are new, Fritz. Yeah, we're done, Matt. So just the front page remains the same to keep us, like I say, it's an anchor, a marker to keep us on track. All right, everybody's got a coffee and a snack, and thank you to those who brought snacks. And if you're with us online and you don't have a snack, make sure you go get a snack. And some people, Doug, don't need encouragement to get a snack, but have an extra cup of tea. How about an orange? Oranges are on sale, Bonnie, so an orange is good. All right. All right, as people grab coffee, I have wonderful news for you. We are through the worst of it. We are through the darkness and the awful and the death and the slavery and the bondage, and we're getting into the better part of the more encouraging part of the book. But tonight we also will encounter the most personal part of the book of Romans, and probably one of the most, outside of the Psalms, probably one of the most personal and intimate parts of the New Testament. Jesus, a moment in the garden, is one of the most intimate, personal, but this part in Romans 7 is Paul's great personal confession, and it is him revealing his weakness. So that I was thinking a lot about what we've been talking about, this idea of what is Christianity, and I coined this phrase, and I think it works, that is, Christianity is a mystery wrapped in a metaphor revealed in a man. Makes sense? It's a mystery. There is something mystical and supernatural and beyond rational thought that is Christianity. But God in his, and even the fact that I use the word his, in God, in the accommodation to us as people, makes accommodation in language and images and pictures that we can understand. So it's this mystery wrapped in a metaphor, but ultimately revealed in a man, or in this case, in this room, in a person. You are the revelation of the gospel in your action. So it was funny, last week I made a comment about men with lust, and someone who was here said, well, don't you think women lust? And I kind of stumbled a bit, so I went and spoke with her. I said, it's not that I don't think they do, it's just that my mouth can't say those two words together at the same time, because I was raised in a fairly prudish culture to say that women lust. I can't even make eye contact with you as I say that. So it's not that I don't believe that's an issue for women, I can't. I went and I apologized and spoke with her. And what's that? Bitty. She said, I get that now, that makes sense. I said, it's just blah, 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 blah. I can't say that. So women, y'all got your issues that we do, and y'all need to deal with them the way y'all deal with them. That makes sense? But the Mennonite English prude in me can't say that. So a little bit, I say. Is it still pushing up, Bonnie? Oh, I got a green light that's, nope. Huh.
You're going to have to repeat all of that.
Yeah, it's there. It says it's working. Do you want me to stop and start again? Okay. Because we've been live, we haven't dropped any frames. We got a green light. Yeah. Maybe it's on. Nope. Just the screen. Okay, we're going to jump out and jump back. Oh, wait, maybe no. I'll do this. Okay. Oh, yeah, no, it's just slow. Right there. Yep. No, I think it is working, just there's a time delay. All right. So, does that make sense? A mystery wrapped in metaphor, revealed. I just like the alliteration of 3 M's. So, it could be a wonder wrapped in words, revealed in a woman. How's that? We can make it into 3 W's. A wonder wrapped in words, wrapped in a woman. Or revealed in a woman. I'm okay with that. I'm making eye contact with Shelley to make sure that you, each one of us reveals Christianity.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I wasn't paying attention.
No, sorry, no, good.
Sorry. I thought the answer was always Jesus.
Tonight the answer will be Shelley. I will select certain moments where the answer is Shelley. All right, we are in the middle of Romans chapter 6 or 8. You can see in your introductory on page 1 just the context of where we're at. And now we enter this next section. We're wrapping up the section on the outcome of justification and moving into Jesus and the law. So what is the connection between justification, salvation, the cross, all this, and its relationship to the Jewish law? So we are at chapter 7 tonight. Chapters 7 through 11 are Paul's clearest teaching on the relationship between the law and the gospel. Chapter 7, verse 1. Who's got it open? Fritz, do you want to read 7, verse 1?
Okay, do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to men who know the law, that the law has authority over a man as long as he lives.
Good. So who is he addressing? Christians, and to those who know the law. So he's making specific reference to Jewish Christians, to those who know, like he says, to you, brothers, and especially to those who know the law. So the context of this is those who were raised under the law. So Paul continually relies on his audience's background knowledge of his message. He leans into that. So if you were to preach in Leader, what metaphors or illustrations would you not use, knowing full well that very few, if any, of the people in the congregation know what you're talking about?
Legal or political?
What's that?
Legal and political.
Legal, yeah, a lot of legalities, tech talk, good. What else? What other metaphors or language or word pictures would you choose not to use, knowing full well that a lot of people would not know them?
Maybe something like computer talk.
Yeah, computer tech talk, yeah, if you're deep into that, yeah. What else might you not use?
Video games.
Video games, yeah, there might be a small collection, but few, yeah.
Islam, physics, or something.
Physics, yeah.
Religion, Islam.
Yeah, Islam. Yeah, we don't have an understanding of it. We could say, you know, as the prophet once said, we go, what are you talking about, right? Yeah. What would you use? Farming. Yeah, that's good. What's that? Ranching. Yeah. Weather. Yeah. Livestock. Relationships. Family. Yeah. You might use maybe 80s music that, you know, the majority of people still. We were in McDonald's the other day and there was 80s music playing and I thought, this is 40-year-old music. That would be like in 1970 going into McDonald's and they had jazz from the 1920s playing. Like really, that music is still relevant. It's a strange thing, still relevant to this day. Yeah, so I mean, you probably remember using a Star Wars reference one time with somebody, and this older gentleman walked up and said, I don't know what that is, I have no idea what you're talking about, don't do that again. I went, oh, okay, I've learned my lesson, right? Yeah. So if I was to regale you with the depth of Fallout 76 and saying, well, it's like that campaign, you'd all go, what? So Paul is a master of this. He understands that to speak to your audience, you must speak in the context of their language. So his metaphors are contextual to the world he lives in. And the challenge has been for us these last few weeks, has been to contextualize the message with metaphors that our culture, so that we can communicate with our culture effectively the same message. And that's why I say it's a mystery wrapped in a metaphor. And if we want people to understand the gospel, it has to be communicated in language or metaphor they understand, but always revealed through us as people. The Word becomes flesh and dwelt among them, and they beheld the glory of the Father, the only begotten. Right? So the Word lives in us, expresses itself, and then we become the living message. All right. So the context of this is about the law. I don't want to spend a great deal of time talking about the Old Testament law. We could be here for months going into the minutia, but I do want to help you become verse 1. That is, to those who understand the law. All right, tell me, what do you know about the Old Testament law?
613.
613 commands, good, lots of it. Very black and white. If, then.
You couldn't keep them all.
Yeah, impossible to keep them all. Good. Anybody who fails in one, fails in them all.
Crime and punishment.
Yeah, crime and punishment. Good. And,
Force a conscience into somebody legally. You could put up enough barriers, you could make them good.
yeah, you could actually inject morality somehow as if it was like an antibiotic into them. Somebody.
Laws of sacrifice.
Yeah, so very specific kinds of law, and there were different kinds of laws, different natures of law. Good. Anybody else? 10 Commandments? Anybody know them off by heart? Okay, no, that's good. We'll leave it
I
there.
just memorized the two that matter.
Which are,
Love God and love others as yourself.
yeah, that's the ones later. But yeah.
That's, I know all 10 because I know the two.
Oh, very good. You know all 613 then. You can you know all 613 because you know the two. All right. Good. Thou shalt not murder. What's the other 9? Thou shalt not make any graven images. Thou shalt the Sabbath. Yeah. Anyhow. All right. Some of the laws are a bit strange. You can't eat pork or seafood without scales anymore. So if we were under the law, anything that didn't have scales, you couldn't eat. So that includes what? Lobster, shrimp, oysters, clams, eels, octopus, sharks. Yeah. Quails. No. All right, so you can't do that. You cannot wear clothes made out of 2 different materials. Anybody wearing polyester here tonight? Anybody wearing something that's not 100% natural fibers? I think those sweatshirts are probably made of plastic. Oil, yeah, can't wear those. Make tassels on the corner of your clothes with a blue cord on each tassel. So on the 4 corners of your robe, there should be a nice long blue tassel. Nobody's got that tonight? No, Dylan's the only one, but he's the only one who's actually righteous. Oh no, Ethan's righteous too. So they've grown their beards out. Danny has shaved the sides of his beard, so that makes him unrighteous. Because
There was a guy in Costco that liked his beard.
oh, there you go.
And his jacket.
Complimentary guy. Did he ask you out for coffee after too, or no? On the Sabbath, you're not supposed to study, attend tuition. In other words, pay attention, go to school or work. If you do, you'll be stoned to death. So bad news on there. And if you have a skin disease, you got to see your priest for your diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
So just check and he'll look at it. And if it's not healthy, he'll send you out of the camp for a week.
That's not good. Yeah.
No, that's not. And then he'll come to. So,
That's actually good because with the doctor shortage, we all go.
yeah, that's right. Just come by.
Yeah, Dad, we just keep looking.
Can I see your psoriasis? Notice it says priest, not pastor. I want to clarify that.
He doesn't have his collar on.
Yeah. So there are many obscure laws that you would be forced to live by. There's a wonderful book called The Year of Living Biblically.
I was just gonna ask you if you've read it.
Yeah. And he tries. Yeah, he lives out, and then he has to stone an adulterer. And he always carried a little rock in his pocket. And he was on the street. He said, he finally walked up to a stranger. He said, "Have you ever committed oh yeah, I'm having it." And he picks up, he takes a stone up, throws it at him, because yeah, it's really quite a good book. Yeah, because you have to live you have to live according to the law. Yeah, very difficult to do. All right. The law had four main purposes. Two that we know from the Old Testament, two that are revealed to us in the New Testament. The one is to display God's character. Shelley, could you look up Deuteronomy 4, 6 through 8? Elena, could you look up Leviticus 19, 9 and 10? Ethan, Romans 3, 20. And Harlan, Galatians 3, 23 through 25. These will give us, these are just single illustrations. Of course, there's a lot of verses, but these are the supporting verses that will show us that I'm not making this stuff up as I go along. All right, Shelley, Deuteronomy 4, 6 through 8.
Carefully follow them, for this will show your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the people. When they hear about all these statutes, they will say, "This great nation is indeed a wise and understanding people." For what great nation is there that has a God near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call to him? And what great nation has righteous statutes and ordinances like this entire law I set before you today?
Good. So when you have these laws, you can say to the nations, look how wonderful God is. So it was there to display God's character to the nations around them. Elena. Leviticus 19, 9, and 10. It's in your notes. Not the text, just the reference.
When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of the field, or gather the produce of your harvest, to make it over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes or fall, leave them for the poor and the poor and those who got.
Good, exactly. So that would bless the poor, right? It was designed as a civil act to make sure that the poor were looked after, to bless the people of Israel, and there's a bunch of other ones about to protect them. Why weren't they allowed to eat lobster? Well, let's back it up a step. Why weren't they allowed to eat pork? Because of trichinosis, right? If you eat pork, you will get sick. Why did you have to go see the priest if you had a skin condition? Because it could be contagious and spread. So you went outside the camp, you waited 7 days. If it cleared up, you went back inside the camp again, right? Why did you have to wash your hands after you touched blood? So you don't get sick, right? So many of the laws were, and why they were all dietary laws, prescriptive laws. They didn't eat ravens because of sickness, right? So these laws kept them healthy. In a world that didn't understand microbiology, it would keep them clean, and they would keep them. Hygiene. Well, many of them were hygiene laws, yeah? Dietary laws were health issues. Washing was hygiene. All these things to keep the camp clean, right? So if there's a skin issue, if they're sick, put them out, because they didn't understand how diseases are transmitted. But if you isolated someone, it would protect you, right? You wouldn't cough on someone. So much of the Old Testament law is designed to bless and protect Israel. Good. All right, Ethan.
For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin.
So the purpose of the law is to point out our sins. Yep. And then Harlan, lastly, Galatians 3, 23 through 25.
Until Christ came, we were guarded by the law, kept in protective custody, so to speak, until we could believe in the coming of the Savior. Let me put it another way. The Jewish laws were our teacher and guide until Christ came to give us right standing with God through our faith. Now that Christ has come, we don't need this law any longer to guard us and lead us to Him.
Good, thank you. That's pretty much self-explanatory, right? All right, so that's the four purposes of the law: to display God's character to the nations and to the people, to protect and bless Israel, to reveal sin, and to guide Israel until Jesus came. All right, there were three kinds of laws There were civil laws. Where are we up to for reading? We're going to go backwards. Joyce. Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. Bonnie, ceremonial. Numbers 29, 39. And Donna, moral. Leviticus 19, 13 as examples. So there were civil, ceremonial, and moral. Yeah, it's good. Good for us all. Deuteronomy 24, 1 to 4.
If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, and if after she leaves his house she becomes a wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband who divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance.
So that's one of the many civil laws governing relationships. So if you're married and divorced, and then she gets remarried and divorced or he dies, you can't remarry your first wife.
You know, it's funny, I've thought about that, right? You think about divorce.
You thought about you remarrying Joni?
No, but it's this idea of divorce and reconciliation. You think, well, you know, get married, don't get remarried. What if that person gets married, and what if they are available again? Kind of.
Would you remarry them?
It's just the same kind of swirl that I thought about, but
Yeah.
Old Testament would say, no.
Nope, you can't do it because you dishonor.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And why does it
If you're
dishonor?
defiled, she's defiled.
She's defiled because she slept with another man.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's.
Remarriage, she slept with two other men.
I know.
Like, I don't know.
And if he divorced her,
Yeah,
But she could go to another man, just not the first.
she just couldn't go back to the first one.
Which,
Yeah, no.
very
that is
curious.
Yeah.
weird.
It is weird.
It is weird. Anyhow, that's an example of why the law is a good thing we don't have it in that sense. That's an example of civil law. Good. Ceremonial, Bonnie, 29, 39.
You shall present these to the Lord at your appointed times, besides your votive offerings and your freewill offerings, for your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, and for your drink offerings, and for your peace offerings.
Good. So that's an example of ceremonial. You've got all these offerings, drink offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, meal offerings, all these. That would be a ceremonial law. And Donna, Leviticus 19:13.
You shall not oppress your neighbor, nor wrong him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning.
Yeah, that's a moral law. Don't oppress him. Interesting, eh? If you hire a guy, you have to pay him that night before he goes home. Dylan? Yeah. No. So that's an immoral law. Don't oppress the poor and the weak and those who labor for you. All right. So those three types of laws are governed. In Canada, we have the first one by the bookload, lots of civil laws. We don't have really any ceremonial laws. I don't know if we have any moral laws, but the Legion would have ceremonial laws. I've got my Padres book, tells me how to do things. We still have ceremonial. All right. Those ceremonial laws are expressed primarily through the 7 main feasts. So if you want to look at the list, but turn the page over, you'll see a chart. And again, this is as we say, a lick and a promise about the law. So if you look at the calendar, you'll see March, April, May, June, July, August in clockwise rotation. And on top, you'll see some words like Nisan, Iyar, Siva, Tammuz. Those are the Hebrew months. And then there's the feasts. So if you look at Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits and wheat, those are all spring, early summer. Trumpets, atonement are late summer, early fall. Tabernacles and Sukkot, late fall. And then Hanukkah is at New Year's. So,
Chris should have been here tonight.
yeah, this is his wheel horse.
Out on Sunday. In Sunday school. Was that right? None of us were helpful.
There we go, there's a chart. So,
Yeah.
7 major feasts, all tied to the seasons. And then, I need to fill the space with something. There's a bunch of unclean animals, what you're not allowed to eat. Bacon, ham, pork, rabbits, hares, rodents, web-footed birds, birds of prey, all shellfish and fish without scales or fins, eels, snakes, snails, and all creeping things. So those are all off the list.
They're pretty much still off the list for us. Except bacon and pork.
Yeah.
Shellfish.
When was the last time anybody ate a rodent? Anybody want to share the last time they ate a
You're
rodent?
not supposed to eat ducks.
Web-footed, yeah, you can't eat web-footed birds.
So are geese.
Ducks or geese.
Crane.
The crane, I guess we cannot eat crane.
It's not web-footed, right? It's not web-footed. No.
Cranes?
And you can't eat birds of prey as well.
Sorry.
Oh, they are two-toed, they're not web-footed.
They're not web-footed.
But you can't eat birds of prey, so you can't eat hawks, eagles, ravens. Yeah. basically, we're talking lamb and beef are your primary diet.
Is, like, was it, like, with the seafood stuff and ducks and stuff like that, was, like, ducks get parasites?
Yes, because of what ducks eat, right? Ducks can be bottom feeders, ducks can be...
Chickens are everything too.
Well, that's true. Chickens are clean.
Maybe it's the water too.
I don't know. Yeah.
Because ducks are deep in the water and then they drink the water, so maybe you do.
Yeah.
Yes, chickens do too.
But chickens are clean. So. And the one thing that's not on here, what's that?
Chickens are not clean.
No, it's true. The one thing that's not on here is you can't eat anything with blood in it. So everything has to be cooked.
With blood in, okay.
Like, you can't keep, no blood sausage.
No. You can't eat your meat rare.
Okay.
Everything has to be cooked.
No good steak.
Yeah, no rare steak. So. All right. The law was divided into two categories or two camps. And if you turn on to page 4, there's going to be some big words here, and we will do the best we can with them. The Torah is the law. There is the written Torah, that is the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then there's what's called the oral tradition. That is, the rabbis over the centuries would talk about it. So there's the law, and then there's the interpretation of the law that they discussed. That's called the oral Torah. Now that oral Torah was eventually written down. So let's go on the left column there where you see it says written Torah. Then there are 3 sets of commandments, or the mitzvah, the commandments. That's what was there inside the written Torah. And there's the shukim, my pronunciation is butchering this, mishpatim and idot or idiot. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but probably not. There are 613 mitzvahs. That is 613 commands issued by God himself. And they're divided into 3 categories. The first is the chachim, that is the decrees. These are statutes given without reason that are irrational. Yes?
You said the commandments, the 613 or laws, same thing?
Yeah, laws and
Those are
commandments.
given by God?
God himself gave them in the Torah.
Oh,
So all 613 are in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
I thought those were, like, the Pharisees came up.
Nope, that's all later. This is the 613 laws written in the Torah.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's a big list. There's thousands in the next section. So, those are the 600. And they're broken into 3 categories. So, a statute given without reason that can seem irrational, that we go, I don't know why God wants us to do this, but we're going to do it. Right? Yeah. I don't know why we're not supposed to eat chicken or, ducks. I don't know. Now we, so that's. And then there is the mishpatim, that are laws given for a specific reason against theft. So we might say, I don't understand why God doesn't allow you to marry your wife after she's been married a second time. I liked her, things worked out. I don't know why. That might be classified. And then a rabbi would decide, which one of those it is, right? Which one do we understand? Which one don't we understand? Good. And then there is the idat, that is testimonies or laws given to commemorate things. That's all the holidays. So the law is divided into 3 categories. Then there's the oral law that was written down. That's called the Midrashim. That's when they took all these oral traditions and they finally wrote them down. These are Jewish rabbinical laws not written in the Torah. And they too are divided into 3 categories. The Gezerot, these are laws instituted by the rabbis to prevent inadvertent breaking of the mitzvah. All right. So let's give you an example. If the Torah, the command of God is, you shall only walk 5 miles on a Sabbath, how could you protect yourself from breaking that law? Only walk 4. And that would be the law, that would be under the Gezerot. That's a new law. So when Jesus says to the Pharisees, you add burden upon burden, that's what he's talking about. You're adding laws to the laws. It was a way of keeping you safe from crossing the line. Makes sense, right? If God says don't do this, well, we're just going to back the law up and make it even more strict and more stringent, so I'll never risk breaking the law. Make sense? Okay, that's those. Then there is the takana, that is a law that doesn't come directly from the Torah, but is implied by it. It's not there, but it seems to imply that, and we all agree. So the lighting of candles on the eve of Shabbat would be, it's not written in the law, but it seems to be implied by that. So that would be that. And then the minhagim, which is a rabbinically approved custom, although it's not a law. And that is eating apples and honey at New Year's, being an example of that. All right. So to be a good First century, you had to know the laws, the decrees, the testimonies, case law, the restrictions, and the customs. You had to know law after law after law
So
after.
at what age were people responsible for this?
Guess, you know the answer. 13.
The age of accountability?
That's when you get your bar mitzvah, you become a son of the law, or a beth mitzvah, a daughter of the law. And at age 13, you now carry the weight of the law for yourself. So all this is on your shoulder at 13.
Really, they had to be mature.
And that's why they would study. You'd study for your bar mitzvah, you'd study for your beth mitzvah, and you would dedicate yourself to this. Yeah. So, any questions? That's a bird's eye view of the law without going into a great amount of detail.
So the original law was given by God,
That's the Torah.
yeah, and then this oral Torah, and that's wrong what they were doing. right?
No, it had a benefit,
It did, okay.
but it was not divine. It was just like we would have laws, but we'd also have bylaws and practices. So as a church, as a church, we have minhagim, that is, church-approved customs. So what would be a church-approved custom that we would have?
Not smoking?
Not smoking. Yeah, that's right. It's not in the book, right? It's not in the law, but it might be implied by the law, but it would be an oral tradition. Yeah, and that we as a community have agreed on that.
Coffee after church.
Coffee after church, yeah. How we dress in church,
Always come in the side door.
always come in, all those kind of things, right?
The Mennonites have a lot, like dancing, and they've got like their own book.
Yeah, and that would be very much like that'd be very much like the Jews. All these traditions, these interpretations. If you're a Mennonite, you understand the oral Torah and the weight it has on a person. Yeah, there's a wonderful book called Jacob Out of the Village. Pre-World War II, the story of a young Hutterite boy who leaves the colony, and they're going to visit their parents one time, and they had the red terracotta tiles on the floor, and they come home, and Mom looks, and she sees a terracotta dust underneath the fridge and the stove, and she says they were dancing, because they would kick up the dust off the floor, and she knew, right? It's a great book. Jacob Out of the Village is a very good book. But it's how you live under that law, under this oral side of the law, at the expense of, and because that way you don't have to know the law, right? Because you can live under the traditions. And the traditions are burdensome. That's why Jesus says you add burden upon burden, weight upon weight, you crush people with the law. And that's what was happening over here. All right, any other thoughts?
What does sundry mean?
Just more and more. Like sundries are just those little bits and bobs, those extras. Yeah. You think about Bonnie, sundries, that would be,
Yeah, just odds and ends,
yeah.
miscellaneous stuff.
Why did they put miscellaneous? Why did that be so fancy?
Well, same reason we got those Hebrew letters before it. All right. Make sense? Okay, that's a cursory glance at the law. All right. So now, Paul says, I'm writing to those of you who know the law. So that's the background of this. Again, writing in the context of his audience. And now you have entered that context to a greater or lesser degree. Obviously, we don't have all all 613. I could print them off, but we would be here all evening reading 613 laws before you're the age of 13.
Wow.
And required to keep them all. You can see where guilt is phenomenal.
Quite something for
Yeah.
a kid.
Yeah, well, they took their faith very seriously, right? So you went to rabbinical school, or like my friends growing up in Garden City, they all went to Jewish school up to they were 13. And they learned the Torah, they learned the law, that's what they did in school. They learned English, geography, and math, but they also had Hebrew classes.
This was every male, like kind of,
Yeah, well, in my day, it was every male, and all boys and girls both.
okay.
Yeah, because Beth Mitzvah is for girls, Bar Mitzvah is for boys. Yeah, Beth is daughter, and so Beth Mitzvah, if you look on that, there's the Mitzvah right there. So that is the daughter of the law, and Bar Mitzvah is the son of the law. Yeah. All right, so now Paul introduces this big section on his relationship and the relationship of grace to the law. So the question is, why does Paul devote chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, and just so much of this book now to his relationship to the law? 9 through 11 are all about the relationship between the law. Well, some of the arguments are simply this, that there was tension in the Church of Rome between the believing Gentiles and the believing Jews, right? The Gentiles come from this pagan background, worshiping Mithra and their blood and their orgies and all this stuff, and the Jews come with 613 laws, and they're trying to figure out how to live together under this new covenant of grace. So no one really, we're just speculating some of it. Some may have been calling for legalism. We saw that before in the book of Acts. You know, you must obey the law. What should we do with these new believers? How much of the law should they obey? And the great conference in Jerusalem is the debate about that. Some people think the Judaizers were putting emphasis on Moses and then Christ, so we get the book of Hebrews as a response to that. A misunderstanding of how the gospel applies to the Jews, the relationship to the new covenants, on and on. There could have been all these tensions, right? The jealousy of believing Jewish leadership in the church, replacing believing Gentile during Nero's edict when the Christians were pushed out. So there could have been all kinds of reasons, and that's just speculation. But whatever the root cause was, there was tension in the Church of Rome between the Jews and the Gentiles and the relationship of the law to the gospel. If you grew up in a Mennonite background, the relationship of law to gospel probably was an issue in your home, right? As you walked away and said, what laws should I keep, right? Remember growing up and being having to wear church clothes all day? Like, did you, was that, yeah, that, you know, and how do I live now that I come to this, you know, how do I live in my freedom now? What do I do? Now that I can't dance anymore, I don't know. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. So Paul grabs a hold of a new metaphor, where before he's using the metaphor of slavery and death releasing us from slavery, now he uses the metaphor of death releasing us from marriage. One of the clearest metaphors in the Old Testament of Jesus to Israel was marriage. He calls her the bride. He calls her his wife. And so Paul changes metaphors from the Roman image of slavery, which was common, to the Jewish metaphor of marriage. Why?
They understood that.
Because they understood it, exactly. Where the Romans would understand slavery in all its horrific depths, so too Jews would understand marriage in all its, hopefully, blessed depths. And they had a lot of, that's why we picked the marriage law, because the marriage laws were so particular in Jerusalem. In other words, even if you were divorced from that woman and she got remarried, you couldn't remarry her. You were completely separate from her.
I wonder if that was to make sure that it didn't get trivialized that, oh, well, I'll go to him, and if it doesn't work out,
That's right.
you can always go home.
Yeah. And divorce in Israel was quite easily for men. They would have a certificate, and I have a copy of one, not on me, but on my computer, that would be signed, and you would go into a public place, and you would hand it to her, and 3 times you would say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and you'd hand it to her, and then she was now
I
divorced.
bet you it's probably more, if that's the case, I bet you it's more for him, that he couldn't just send her off and go, oh, well, if he gets sick of her too, then I can take it back.
Yeah, that's right. Strangely enough, despite what it appears, the Old Testament law defends women remarkably well, right? And that's why Jesus speaks about divorce and says, Moses had permission to do it. This is not God's desire. And when you read the Old Testament in relationship to the laws of the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians, women are protected, remarkably so in Israel, despite what it appears to be. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'm still amazed at the whole, the way that the Jewish marriage custom and all that is parallel, and how that all works with the coming of Christ. And
Absolutely.
that is,
Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor. Yeah. All right. So, this new image. Romans 6 and Romans 7 are parallels of the idea of death and life. If you look at those 2 columns, Romans 6, 1 is sin, died to sin, walk in newness of life, died freed from sin, having been set free. If we go into 7, law, died to law, news of spirit, being freed from law, having died, and free from law. So these are parallel structures. Paul's saying the same thing to a different audience. So as this letter is being read, the Romans are going, oh, I get this. And the Jewish congregation is going, well, I sort of get this. Then they read chapter 7 out loud. They go, oh, I get what you're saying. So, and again, a mystery expressed or wrapped in metaphor. And we have 2 separate metaphors to 2 separate people who dwell in the same fellowship, but they would both understand the same mystery. Does that make sense? And that's the beauty of this. All right. How do we interpret this passage? Well, Paul could be talking about himself. He could be talking about, that's called the autobiographical perspective. He could be talking about all mankind as a representative. Theodore of Mopasutia said he's talking about Adam, and some people think he's talking about Israel, but I'll put my cards on the table pretty shortly here. All right, let's take a look. Verses 1 through 3, where are we up to for reading? Joni, let's pick it up. I'm going to try and move a little quicker these days. Sorry, we really bogged down in the last section. I want to maybe pace ourselves a little better. 7, 1 to 3.
Do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law has authority over someone only as long as that person lives? For example, by law a married woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law that binds her to him. So then, if she has sexual relations with another man while her husband is still alive, she is called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is released from that law and is not an adulteress if she marries another man.
All right, so what's he talking about? This is a metaphor, remember? For what? Our bondage to the law. At 13, what did you take on your shoulders? The weight of the law. You were bound to keep all the law. And Paul says the only way out from under the law is to die. Just like a woman who is bound by law to her husband, if she breaks that law while in relation, she is an adulteress. But if he dies, she is now free from the law. So what's the only way to get out from underneath the commandments of the Torah and the obligations you took when you were 13? You have to die. So what has he just said? The last few chapters, we are dead. So now he takes that language and he pulls it into a Jewish, and they go, of course. And Paul says, therefore, you're freed from the law. Because they were trying to blend the law and Christianity, grace and law, trying to figure out the relationship. So what is the relationship of the believer now in Christ, under Christ, death, to the law? What authority does the law have over the believer? None. Why? Because they're dead.
Dead to self, alive in Christ.
Exactly. So you are no longer under obligation to the law. The law has no authority in your life because you're dead, just as a wife is no longer under the authority of her husband when he dies. Right? Make sense? So you see the shift in metaphors? Good. 4 to 6, Donna. Oh, no, Dylan.
Therefore, my brethren, you also were made to die to the law through the body of Christ, so that you might be joined to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. Keep going.
4 to 6, yeah.
Sorry. For while we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in the members of our body to bear fruit for death. But now we have been released from the law, having died to that by which we were bound, so that we serve in newness of the Spirit and not in oldness of the letter.
Good. So he repackages the metaphor. Same ideas, same mystery, just now spoken in different language. Interesting, verse 5, the restrictions arouse passion. What does law do to us? If somebody tells you you can't, I want to.
The dog at the end of the rope.
That's exactly it. We know when the law says don't, we do. So he says the law was the restrictions of the law aroused my passions. When somebody said, don't do it, I went, oh, what is it I'm supposed to do? Yeah. So that's the role of the law, because the law reveals our sinfulness, right? The law actually makes us sinful, which is completely, like you imagine to a rabbi saying this, they'd be like, that's impossible. Paul goes, let me tell you about experience. And then if you look at verse 2 and verse 6 in your Bibles, you'll see the same word as there used there, released. In verse 2, you'll see the word released from her husband. And if you look in verse 6, released from the law, right? So that he's tying the metaphor like a string, connecting the two images, right? So they would take a concrete idea, got it, and apply it to an abstract idea. This is good writing. It helps us understand. And then just a funny little note, when he uses the oldness of the law, this is the only time this word is used in the New Testament. It means worse for wear or worn out from use. The law is basically just worn out from use. It's been used for so long, it's no longer useful. And what do you do with something that's worn out from use?
Throw it away.
Yeah, throw it away. Get rid of it, right? It's no longer
You give it
used.
to Ethan.
What's that? You give it to Ethan, who leaves it in his driveway. Yes. So, All right. All right, we've got time. We're not going to read all 725, but take a moment. I'm going to ask you to read it just for the sake of time. Take a moment to read Romans 7:7-25, and see if that does not sound familiar.
It was an awesome book where the kids just don't know.
Yes.
When kids would pull some of this stuff and or have to jump on parts of the verse and
Yeah.
finish it. It was remarkable to hear it because there's so many twisted.
It's a very poetic, and you'll see why, I think, why it's written the way it is.
Yeah.
All right. We're just going to touch on the first, up to the first part before we delve and spend most of our energy on 7 through, on 14 through 20. So 7 through 13, Paul is arguing the goodness of the law and the purpose of the law. He can't get away, because he's a rabbi, he can't get away from believing in the goodness of the law. So what does he see as the purpose of the law in those first opening verses? What is the good of the law?
If there would be no law, there would be no sinning.
Good, because the law convinces us of sin. Right.
It was supposed to result in life,
But it didn't, did it?
to result in death.
Exactly. Verse 13, therefore did that which is good become a cause for death in me. May it never be. That's about as emphatic as you can get. Paul is defending the law. Rather, it was sin in order that it might be shown to be sin by effecting my death through that which is good, so that through the commandment sin would become utterly sinful. The law revealed sin. The law is not sin. The law is good. And the goodness of the law is to reveal the human heart. That's what it did. That's why law is good.
Makes you think ignorance is bliss,
But it's not.
right? Because he says, I wouldn't have known about coveting.
That's right. Had I not been told the covenant, I would have. He says, and it's good I found out.
But it
It's
doesn't mean you wouldn't have.
without the law he wouldn't have.
But you still would have coveted. You just wouldn't.
That's right. You wouldn't have known it was bad. That's right. Yeah, you've still done those
I
things.
didn't know I was coveting.
Yeah, you would have committed adultery, you would have coveted, and you would have thought you were fine. You know, it's like if you're a celiac and you think, I don't know, and you just keep eating flour. Is it celiac? Yeah. And you just keep eating and going, oh, why am I not feeling well? I don't know.
We probably should mix the flour with some ingredients to do better.
Yeah. And so the law is good because the law reveals the nature of the human heart, reveals sin. And that's the benefit of the law. And so Paul cannot let go of the goodness of the law. But the goodness of it was not making us right with God. That's the mistake. Because the law was believed that was the path of righteousness. Paul says, actually, in a wonderful way, that's not the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law is not to make a person righteous with God. The purpose of the law is to reveal that you're not righteous with God. Because you can't keep the law. This is so counter to everything he had been taught. We can't even imagine the amount of the mental shift Paul had to make, what do you call it when you have a complete change? Paradigm shift, yeah. The mental gymnastics he had to do. Because all his life he believes this is the path of righteousness. If you're righteous, if you behave righteous, and all of a sudden he makes this realization that it's the opposite of everything I've thought my entire life. That you realize the impact this is having on him. And that is then the frustration he finds. All right. And which I want to focus on in the time remaining. So it begins with a clear premise. The law is good. The second premise is not so clear. What is Paul talking about in the next few verses, especially verses 14 through 20? This is the one that almost feels poetic, right? Is this, I'm not going to read all the notes, but is he talking about the feelings of an unsaved person who's struggling, or a saved person? I'll play my card. I think this is Paul's testimony inside the book of his own frustration. He knows the purpose of the law. We're on page 8 now. We know Galatians 3:19, he expresses it. He's already told us what it is. Why the law then? It was added because of transgression. He gives us this whole thing about the law. The law was the tutor that leads us to Christ. And he says in 7:13 that through the commandment, sin would become utterly sinful. I think this is Paul wrestling with his past. He looks at his past and says, I spent my entire life dedicated to the law. I still believe it's good. I want to obey it. He is so culturally, socially, mentally, every possible way entrenched in the law. And he had this break on the road to Damascus, this incredibly, I'm trying to think of the word that would define it, but just this complete change, this existential shift. And now he's got this new gospel, but there's a part of him that can't get rid of that tension. And the tension is driving him crazy. Actually to the point where he says he's wretched. As much as I triumph and support tension, that is, tension will drive you nuts. Like if you say to someone, I love you and hate you, you're going, it would be easier to love you or easier to hate you. You know, I just wish I could do one or the other, but I can't, and you find yourselves in this tension. And this tension causes Paul intense emotional pain. And I think this section is not theological. It is not normative. I think it's normative. I think many of us experience this. But I don't think it's meant to be broken down, systematically studied. I think it's meant to be felt. That this is how Paul feels about his own. And he intersects this whole academic exercise into slavery and life and death. And he says, the law is good. And then he pours out. I want to read it to you in a different translation. And then I want to draw your attention to something major. So this is 14 through 20 in a different translation. This is what we know. The law comes from the spiritual realm. My problem is that I'm of the fallen human realm, owned by sin, which tries to keep me in its service. He says, I know God is, but I live in this world. Listen, I can't explain my actions. Here's why. I'm not able to do the things I want. What did he want to do? Follow the law. He says, I'm a rabbi. I want to keep the law. At the same time, I do the things I despise. He says, but I find myself unable to keep the law. That's human experience. If I'm doing the things I've already decided not to do, I'm agreeing with the law, saying that it's good. But now I'm no longer the one acting. I've lost control. Sin has taken up residence in me and is wreaking havoc. Paul says, despite all the law that I know as a rabbi, I still find myself sinning. And that tension between the good I know I should do, the law, and the reality of my inability to keep it is wreaking havoc. It's like this out-of-control dog that's living inside me, and it's running around breaking all the furniture. And I keep telling it, be good, obey, obey. The dog says, not on your life. And it runs around. It's wreaking havoc, verse 17. I know that in me, that is in my fallen human nature, that there is nothing good. I can will myself to do something good, but that doesn't help me carry it out. I can try and, force goodness. I can determine that I'm going to do good every morning. I wake up, I'm going to do good, but I don't do it. Instead, I end up living out the evil that I decided not to do. Any of us who struggle with addictions, this is our verse. I determine that I'm going to do good, but I don't do it. Instead, I'm living out the evil that I decided not to do. If I end up doing the exact thing I pledged not to do, I'm no longer doing it because sin has taken up residence in me. I notice he does not make sin as the excuse for his behavior. He acknowledges his responsibility, but he says there is something inside me that is corrupting me, this sin nature, this death. Verse 21. Here's an important principle I've discovered. Regardless of my desire to do the right thing, it is clear that evil is never far away. I love this. Yeah. For deep down, I am in happy agreement with God's law. But the rest of me does not concur. I see a very different principle at work inside me, in my body, where this battle is occurring. And it's a war with my mind. I become a prisoner in this war to the rule of sin. If you've ever done something that you didn't want to do and just felt compelled to do it, you know this verse. I am a prisoner in this war to the rule of sin in my body. I cannot stop myself from doing that which I don't want to do. I am absolutely miserable. If you've ever struggled with addictions, anybody, we won't do a testimony here, it makes you miserable. And that's where Paul would say, "O wretched man that I am, is there anyone who could free me from this body of sin and death reign so supremely?" And what's 25 say? "I am thankful to God for the freedom that comes through our Lord Jesus Christ, the Anointed One. So on one hand, I devotedly serve God's law with my mind." That's the old rabbi talking. "But on the other hand, with my flesh, I serve the principle of sin." And what is the only way to get rid of the law? To die. I think this, interesting by the way, all of this is present tense in the Greek. This isn't past tense. This is Paul's struggle as he writes this book. This old rabbi, still, after all these years of following Jesus, despite his Damascus Road experiences, 3 years in the Syrian desert with Jesus, still struggles with his nature and with his background. My Mennonite friends, I won't ask you, I suspect you still struggle with your background. As somebody who has a life of nothing but freedom, right? Who wasn't under, they'll struggle with this as well. Because I'm so used to doing whatever I want. Now you're telling me I can't do that? This struggle with the old nature, I don't care what our background is, this is our struggle. And that's why I love this passage.
And that's not just applied to people with addictions. I think this is common to all of us.
Absolutely, Fritz. Yeah. Addictions would be the extreme nature of that. Yeah, but absolutely, Fritz. Every one of us struggles with this. I know that I should do good, but there's something in me and I'm worried. What I want you to look on page 9 is why I believe this is testimony, not theology. I put every other word except the personal pronouns in small print. I want you to count the we's in the eyes. Oh, sorry, the me's in the eyes. Page 9. Remember, Christianity is a metaphor, a mystery wrapped in metaphor, revealed in man, revealed in Paul. How many I's and me's? Give it a quick count. 30? Anybody else? Okay. Ballpark it.
Are there 26 eyes?
20. How many?
36 me, mine, I.
36 times. Is this theology? It's theological, but is this teaching? No, what is this? This is testimony. Confession. Yeah. This is 36 times Paul says, I. I don't think he's talking about Jews. I think he's talking about Adam. Who's he talking about? Himself. And it's in present tense. He's not talking about his old nature. He's talking about the man who wrote this book.
There's no we.
Yeah, there's no we. The only we is at the beginning. For we know the law is spiritual. But he says, and I am fleshly. It's the only time we is
But
there.
that verse in 17 that says, "No longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me." That's
Yeah.
an interesting verse.
It is. Because it borders on,
It borders on it's not my fault, the devil made me do it.
it borders on that. Right. But what was the purpose of the law? To bring sin to life. And to light. It revealed sin, right?
Not to life so much, I wouldn't say, right? But just
But
to
to-
expose it.
yeah, to light.
Expose it,
Yeah.
not to bring it about.
No, but to expose it, right, yeah.
To show you.
Yeah. So Paul acknowledges that there is something within him that is, in some sense, alien to him or outside of him, but still is him.
Because it's not supposed to be there.
No.
We're not made with that. Like, we all have it, but
That's
we're
right.
not supposed to.
No, and when the law came, it brought it to light. And when the law came, it gave it a name. Now I know what it is. It's like this thing inside of, I don't know, like, should I commit? I don't know. Also you go, oh, that's what that is. Now I have a name on it. And now I can call it sin.
But as kind of circular as the whole, that passage is,
Yeah.
it's like Fritz said, it's something that anyone, even if you just skim it,
Yeah.
Anyone can relate to that.
You can feel the emotional tone of this, I think, more than the theological tone. Now, there's deep theology. I mean, what is the nature of sin? How is it? But the overall sense of frustration. And that's why it ends on that beautiful phrase, how wretched, oh wretched man that I am, who will live in this. The word wretched there is the image of pulled apart and divided. So when we throw up, what do we say we're doing? We're retching, right? We're separating ourselves from our internals, right? Especially if you've really thrown up a lot. You feel like your guts are on the floor kind of thing. And that's Paul says, I'm a man divided from myself. And that feeling when you've thrown up, how horrible you feel, you're just absolutely exhausted. And that's that. So there's a strong emotional content of just frustration, anger, and pain, and separation. You know, he's leaning up against the spiritual toilet bowl, and he's puking. He's like, oh, the good that I want to do, I can't do it. And he's puking his heart out on this page. And he's feeling, he just says, and I'm just wretched with how I feel. His spiritual toilet bowl. The page is white, it works. I wanted you to feel as much as understand tonight the frustration with sin that I suspect every one of us here tonight has had. We could all write this. The rest of the book now takes us, and Paul says, I understand how you feel. But the only answer is Jesus, not Shelley. The only answer to this wretched human condition, and the rest of the book will now take us off from that. I pulled up a few metaphors that I thought were parallel.
It's also the only answer is death.
Yes, death is the only answer. Yeah, the crucified life is the only answer. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, if you memorize one verse in your life, memorize Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live, I live by faith in the one who loved me and gave himself for me. You know, that's the Christian life, right? And again, that's a metaphor, but a metaphor that expresses a reality revealed in a man here. All right, here's the ones I came up with. This idea of sin, because we must own and disown our sin at the same time. We're back to tension again. And the ones I thought about was, like Paul describes it like sin. I thought sometimes it's a disposed despot fighting to regain control. You know, there was this despot, this South American dictator who was on the throne, and then we disposed him. And he's still there. We didn't execute him properly, and he's still running around with his little rebel army, you know, trying to gather and take over control of the country. And the only way to get rid of that despot is actually to execute him. So Paul says, you know, it's like, I think, well, that metaphor, we understand the South American dictator kind of despot. The other one is an evicted tenant who just won't leave. You know, Christ buys the house, takes possession, but there's a tenant in there who just, you know.
You gotta kill all the renters.
Yeah, you got to kill the renters. Yeah, this is where my metaphor is falling apart. Or I like the idea of a domesticated raccoon. You know, you think it's healthy and it's a nice pet, but in reality, it's going to rip your face off at night. You know, or a pet monkey in your house, or a pet snake. I like the domesticated raccoon though. You know, because they sort of look like cats, but they're wild animals who still destroy stuff. So I thought, how do I contextualize this Pauline law passage? And if I was to write it in my journal, I'd say, you know, there is a despot, a rebel despot running around the jungles of my soul. There's an evicted tenant. I just can't kick him out of the house. He keeps, you know, renters' rights, and it's really hard in Canada to evict somebody from a property, right? Or I've got this, you know, domesticated raccoon that I thought was a dog that I could control. Turns out it's a raccoon in my heart. There's got to be. He's giving me rabies. Yeah.
Not a squirrel.
Yeah, not a squirrel. So if you could think of a better metaphor, that would work. All right, let me wrap this up. I think Romans 7 is more than metaphor. It's a mirror of Paul's soul. And I want to read from Dwight L. Moody, because this just summarizes this so well. This is Moody's description. When I was converted, I made this mistake. I thought the battle was already mine. The victory had already won. The crown already in my grasp. I thought the old things had passed away, that all things had become new, and the old corrupt nature, the old life is gone. But I found out, after serving Christ for a few months, that conversion was only like enlisting in the army. There was a battle on hand. And if Dwight L. Moody figured that out, I think we're in good stead to feel the same way. So, not metaphor, this is man, this is testimony. All right, any thoughts as we wrap it up?
Too bad a sin is like the tenant of the home.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think, yeah, Christ should come to the house and do everything else, but this
Yeah.
gives us the keys to living in the
There's one way to get rid of the tenant, though. You got to starve him out. You can starve him, and then he'll have no power. Can't move around as much. He might still be there, but he might not be able to move around. Anyway, that's good. Anybody else a metaphor that leans into that?
I just don't know if you ever get to this point. Totally.
No, exactly.
Totally have the house clean.
But yet, on men's breakfast, we talked about kind of this idea a little too, as Marvin said, talking about until, what was that, it was in Galatians, talked about until we attain the fullness.
Yeah, the fullness of
Christ.
yeah.
Which, what does that mean exactly, which is like.
Is that when we're in eternity?
Based on that context, it didn't sound like it, but.
Yeah, is entire holiness possible in this lifetime? There are some that say absolutely, that a Christian never sins. I don't believe that. That's, yeah, no. Yeah, I know.
You can sin once in your life and never sin it again, and you'd still need a Savior.
Absolutely.
Right, like it doesn't matter if you get there, hey, right on, like, if it's possible, doubt it, but
Yeah.
if it is, it doesn't change you,
No, you're still guilty.
you're still guilty.
Yeah. I think as we grow in grace, that we become more and more like Christ. And I hope if somebody's been following for Jesus for 50 years, there's there may be those besetting sins, but hopefully they're through a lot of. It's like cleaning fish. You cut off the head first, and then you take out the big bones. Right? God deals with the big things first. Then over time, He works His way into the little things. Those things that are harder to get to, the things that are deeper within us, like the fine bones inside us, right? They're still there, but they're harder to get to. So you think about sins that you've been committing for 50 years. They're really entrenched in us, and it takes a lot harder to get rid of those than the ones, like I stole candy when I was a kid, but I can't remember the last time I stole intentionally, Like that's a big sin we would think that would get a hold of pretty easy. So does that make sense? And I think it gets harder as we get older because those sins are deeper in us and we're more naive to them or blind to them, or they're so strong and so powerful, they're so hard to overcome. Yeah.
When during my college years, I painted, right? I always remember I painted a door, and that door was old and stained. And it looked very beautiful with the white paint. Sure enough, I didn't put a primer underneath, so the stain came right back through, right?
Yes.
To me, that was always my life.
Yeah.
That's how I always pictured it, right? I try hard, but those stains are.
Yep. It's a beautiful metaphor.
I need to find a primer.
Yeah. What can wash away my paint? Nothing but the primer of Jesus. Yeah.
We put paint where it aimed.
Yeah, exactly. And all those are good metaphors. I hope we are growing in grace and knowledge. I think the fullness of that will only occur in death. That then we are delivered from the punishment of sin. We are delivered from the power of it here, but ultimately the presence of it only in death. Because salvation is past, present, and future. I think some wise woman said that earlier on.
So the end game is just being most improved?
No, that's not the end. The end game is to be like Jesus.
But you never get there.
No, I don't think it's a competition.
No, but, okay, we always used to make, okay, we'll say it.
Do you want me to turn the camera off? Yeah.
Well, just, okay, because like you look at student awards, whatever,
Right,
and then it was like most improved, it was kind of like,
Right.
you didn't really cut it with student of the year.
yeah, but he did show most improved, yeah.
Tried, right?
Yeah.
But that, like, if we can never attain it, that's essentially what you're going for, just chronic improvement.
Is that a bad thing?
Okay, like, when I think of counseling,
Feels kind of futile.
it feels futile, because sometimes I'm working with kids and it's like, you're never gonna get there, but
Right.
I'm not gonna tell you that yet.
Right,
You're gonna carry that burden with you for the rest of your life.
Right.
You don't drop it. So then where's the power?
But you improve to a point that you get closer to that goal.
But if you're chronically battling and you never get better until you die, that's a weird hope.
But I think you do get.
I think you do have victory over certain areas. I think there are That's the whole idea of the metaphor of death, right? I think there are points where you have victory over that area.
Stepping stones.
Yeah, you may not have victory over the entire realm of your existence, but we should be able to look back and say, I had victory over that.
But doesn't it seem like that big thing is the thing you can never get over?
Ooh.
I can get
Being-
over the little things, but that one big thing.
What is the big thing different in everybody, or is it we talk about the same thing?
I'll say it's different for everybody. Because like for myself, I was talking to my sister yesterday, and we were just talking about losing our mom when we were younger.
Right.
And I said to her, I can't get past the angry piece, right?
Right.
Because, I said, I remember going to Pioneer Girls, and we were praying for this little girl who had brain cancer. And with that faith of a 6-year-old, right?
Right, right.
And then we had missed a couple weeks, and I went back, and I said, how is she doing? And she died.
Oh.
And it was like the glass shattered for me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I still to this day, 50 years later almost,
Yeah, I get that.
it's there.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's like,
Yeah.
that's why I say, I'm not being like trite. And
No,
saying
not
this
at all.
won't improve, but it seems like that big thing, as much as I have sought to repair that glass,
Right.
is there.
So you
Does
haven't.
that make sense?
You haven't.
Yes.
yet.
Haven't
I'm
yet.
getting up there, like I'm
Well, I know,
running
but I
out
would
of
say,
time.
not that you can't,
Yeah.
not that you can't, but I would just say you haven't yet.
Yes, I think the potential for healing is there. Yes, I think it all can be healed. But
So Paul confirms this. It's like those personal demons that you
right.
try to drop just seem to.
But wait till the next section, because he says, because 25 is the answer to his frustration. He doesn't read 25 in your. It's 14 to 24 are the frustration. 25 is the release. Who will deliver me from this? O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?
Thanks be to God.
He says there is deliverance through Christ Jesus. So Paul doesn't leave himself in this situation. It actually ends on a hopeful note that there is victory. To be honest, I agree. I think there are people, myself included, that have a scar or a limp that will not heal, and we have to learn to live with the limp.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think many of us have a limp, and we will live with that limp perhaps until the day we die. But the limp doesn't stop me from walking or striving to run the race, even though, to be honest, part of it is medication helps me live with my limp, right? It's not just therapy, but the limp has actually had a physical effect, the trauma. Right? So I recognize I live with this limp, but that is not going to turn me. And in other areas, I find victory. Okay, so this can be overcome. But maybe in this lifetime, I will live with this the rest of my life. I will have this wound or this scar or this limp.
And perhaps.
And the suffering I live, the verse where Paul says, the suffering we have in this life is not compared to the victory we will have in the next. So I don't focus on the limp. Does that make sense?
It makes me think of the blind man at the well. Why was he blind? So that my glory could be revealed.
Right.
Why did Paul have the thorn in his side? So that I wouldn't boast.
Right, and now, here's a man who never overcame that.
Because it causes us to have to depend on Jesus.
Yeah.
Because I can't do this on my own. If everything went away on its own, well then what would we need him for?
Yeah.
It'd be pretty easy for me.
He says, my strength is made perfect in my weakness. And I don't think Paul's talking about a physical problem there. I think he's talking about something much deeper. I think her name was Sylvia. No, no. Not Sylvia like our Sylvia, but yeah. Anyhow, whatever it was. But Paul acknowledges his limp, right? And he acknowledges that Jesus didn't take away the wound. And he learned to live with the wound. And in that wound, God was glorified. So maybe that's how we overcome it. Not overcome it, but that's how we actually take that wound and we use it as a way to glorify God in our weakness.
So then how do we pray? I know that's a totally different tangent. But then what are we actually praying for?
That's a very good question. And we're out of time, but...
That's the end of our session.
Good stuff. I know Enzo was great questions.
I believe we'll take that up next week.
Turn the tape over and begin again on side 2.
Side B. Yes,
Oh, yeah, when you know there's not going to be, or if
that's right. How do you pray for healing for someone when you think they'll never be healed?
Yeah.
How do you pray with someone
Yeah.
who's got grief that's so profound? You think, well, Lord, do I pray that they overcome this, or do I pray that they learn to live with this, or do I just leave them in their wallowing in their pain? That's none of our nature. We want to help these people, right? And we all know people who are in grief, and we think, is the best I can offer you is a limp.
But isn't that also part of, because most, if not all of us, struggle with how we then relate to others?
Absolutely.
How we walk with them.
Exactly.
We may not be able to experience their grief, but we can be part of that journey.
And Paul acknowledges, he says, we comfort those with the same comfort with those, we weep with those who weep and we mourn with those who mourn. How can I weep if I've never known pain? Right? And so when somebody tells me their pain, I'm going, I got that. I go, I think I understand. I may not have gone through the same journey as you, but I sure understand pain. And so I can cry with you. How do we pray then is a very good question. And that's one, I don't mean to belittle the question or to minimize the nature, but I think there's an answer for that question, just not in this moment.
The Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
How then do we pray?
Yeah, how then do we pray? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thy kingdom come. Daily bread. Enough to get through the day. The problem of pain and suffering is the great theological question. How do we confront pain and suffering? Our own internal pain, our emotional pain, our physical pain, in the light of the promises of victory and glory and overcoming and triumph. Because it seems like Christianity on one hand has this language of triumph and victory. But then the reality of human suffering seems to intersect that. And it seems to basically demolish the existence of God. That's the great philosophical dilemma of the problem of pain, right? A Christian's answer to pain is probably one of the most profound answers to our faith. I'll never forget when Ben and Terry lost their daughter, Rebecca. She was 7 months old. They brought her coffin home in the car, not her, but I remember sitting and visiting with the coffin, and this little 7-month-old girl, Rebecca Gagnon, and their neighbor said, if you can get through this, there's something about Jesus. And I remember doing the grave for Rebecca, thinking, I have no idea what it is. It was probably one of the hardest funerals ever. Because what do you say to a parent who's lost a 7-month-old child, right? And that moment of pain became the defining testimony of Ben and Terry in that community, how they dealt with it. So.
I think it's I say easy, I'm trying to cheat, but it's easy for us to look at suffering in light of eternity if we have our faith.
Yeah, to whitewash it a bit.
Okay, well, this is all temporary, hurts now, but if we look at it in the scope of eternity, then that changes perspective a bit. But still, when you look at the neighbor that you care for that just rejects the gospel, rejects Christ, and suffers and dies, well, you know the end result. And that is heartbreaking, that's frustrating.
Yeah, and that eternity is not a comfort.
No, and that's difficult, but that is the reality of the choice that we all have to respond and, to live for ourselves, and live for Christ, but it is still frustrating.
Yeah. And we know that we can't control our circumstances. The only thing we have some degree of control, not complete control, but some degree of control is our response. Now, we know at times we don't have control over our response. That is sometimes an uncontrolled response. But how we respond to difficulties is, does that make sense? Somewhat in our wheelhouse, wheel horse, but not completely.
I think unless you surrender control to either Christ or to the enemy.
So I'm excited about what the rest of Romans says as a response to this. Because the rest of Romans is from this point forward. And here's a cue. It's about community. Our community is a major factor in dealing with this. All right. Thank you for your discussion.